Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Welcome to another episode of the Scott Report. I want to thank everybody for joining me this evening. It is March 16th, 2022. And tonight we are going to be discussing the topic of money. Money, the dollar, inflation, everything about money. I'm going to do my best with the help of several educational videos that will break down our current money system, the money supply, and why the system is broken and has been broken for more than 50 years. We're feeling the effects after COVID, obviously, and everything else that's going on in the world. But the fact of the matter is the system is broken and has been broken for a very, very long time. So to get started with everything, I think it would be appropriate to put a reference point, to kind of explain where I'm going with this conversation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give everybody a little history in terms of money, gold, and the dollar. This is a video I'm going to show you regarding Muammar Gaddafi, the former leader of Libya, and why he was overthrown. So without further ado, I'm going to go right into that. Let me share the screen here.
While more speculation has been raised on the reasons for NATO's intervention in Libya, and as RT's prevent Gaddafi from burying the American buck.
According to some, it's about protecting civilians.
We must not tolerate this regime using military force against its own people.
Others say it's about oil.
The only reason they're interested with Libya is about the oil. You think we'd be in Iraq if the major export there was broccoli?
But some are convinced intervention in Libya is all about currency, specifically Gaddafi's plan to introduce the gold dinar, a single African currency made from gold, a true sharing of the wealth.
It's one of these things that you have to plan almost in secret, because as soon as you say you're going to change over from the dollar to something else, you're going to be targeted. There were two conferences on this, one in 96 and another one in the year 2000, called the World Mataba Conference, organized by Gaddafi. And everybody was interested. I think most countries in Africa were keen.
Gaddafi didn't give up. In the months leading up to the military intervention, he called on African and Muslim nations to join together to create this new currency that would rival the dollar and euro. They would sell oil and other resources around the world only for gold dinars. It's an idea that would shift the economic balance of the world. Countries' wealth would depend on how much gold they have, not how many dollars they trade. And Libya has 144 tons of gold. The UK has double that, but 10 times the population.
If Gaddafi had an intent to try to reprice his oil or whatever else the country was selling in the global markets and accept something else as a currency, or maybe launch a gold dinar currency, any move such as that would certainly not be welcomed by the power elite today who are responsible for controlling the world's central banks. So yes, that would certainly be something that would cause his immediate dismissal and the need for other reasons to be brought forth for removing him from power.
It's happened before. In 2000, Saddam Hussein announced Iraqi oil would be traded in euros, not dollars. Sanctions and an invasion followed. Some say because the Americans were desperate to prevent OPEC from transferring oil trading in all its member countries to the euro.
The UK's gold is kept here in a secure vault somewhere in the depths of the Bank of England. As in most developed countries, there's not enough to go around. But that's not the case in places like Libya and many of the Gulf states. A gold dinar would have given oil-rich African and Middle Eastern countries the power to turn around to their energy-hungry customers and say, sorry, the price has gone up and we want gold. Some say the US and its NATO allies literally couldn't afford to let that happen. Laura Emmett, RT, London.
And for that, we saw the end of Muammar Gaddafi and the Gaddafi family in Libya. It is a historical fact that anyone who challenges the US dollar and the dollar supremacy in this country will get dealt with in the same way. There was a time, however, that the United States did not have to do that. I'm going to share some articles with you and some historical documents that show how there was a time when we had a sound money policy in this country where money was based on a value, something of value. To be more exact, it was based on precious metals, but it's not anymore. Right now, it is debt. Now, I know that might sound completely ridiculous, but let me show you something really quick to kind of emphasize this point. So these are some of the books we're going to be discussing tonight. The Creature from Jekyll Island. This is the 5th edition of this book, but it was written by a Reserve Bank. Really required reading for anybody that wants to understand economics in the United States and the world for that matter. Confessions of a Economic Hitman by John Perkins. This is his first book. And then the second book, New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, also by John Perkins. But back to my original point of discussing money and that it doesn't have any value whatsoever. Okay? This is a 1935. Wait a minute. Let me get this pulled up here. It's a 1935 silver certificate. Okay. Now, this bill was given to me by my mom years ago. She collects, old money and things like that. She gave this to me. Excuse me. Moving these books out the way. But anyway, this bill, let's take a closer look at it, because this is going to set up the conversation that we're going to have tonight. Now, this is known as a silver certificate. They stopped printing these in the 1950s and 60s. But this dollar bill was worth something at one time. All the dollar bills look like this. In fact, let me contrast here and show you the current dollar bill and the silver certificate. Now, at a glance, if you're not really paying attention, it's easy to just dismiss certain things and not fully understand what's happening here. But let's break it down. Let's look at this. All right, so this is a silver certificate, and it says, this certifies that there is a deposit in the Treasury of the United States of America. And, pardon me, let me get a closer look at this, because here we go. Let me start from the beginning. Silver certificate, first line. Second line, this certifies that there is on deposit in the Treasury of the United States $1 in silver to the bearer on demand. Let me repeat that. Silver certificate, first line. This certifies that there is a deposit in the Treasury of the United States of America, $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand. Okay? And this certificate was valid. You could literally go into the bank in 1935 and get silver out of a commercial bank, out of a reserve bank. Face value. Can't get away from it. Okay? This is what your current dollar bill says. Federal Reserve note of the United States of America, $1. Now, Let me make this real simple. Everybody knows what a car note is. Everybody knows what a house note is. Doesn't need to be defined. This is a Federal Reserve note. That one term represents debt. Car note, debt. House note, debt. Dollar bill, debt. That's all this is. This is real money, and this is debt money. Debt-based currency. You've probably heard that before. And that's exactly what we have in the system right now. I'm going to share a quote with you from a very famous bank person, J.P. Morgan. And here's what J.P. Morgan had to say about money. He said, and I quote, "Gold is money. Everything else is credit." There he is, J.P. Morgan. Okay. The situation that we currently have right now is inflation has surged 7.5% on an annual basis, even more than expected. And it is the highest since 1982. Now, we all know this. Everybody is dealing with this right now, from the higher gas prices to just trying to buy a loaf of bread at the grocery store. We see it. This is real. The question is, what has happened? How is this happening? People will automatically assume that when a price goes up on a product or anything, that inflation maybe just means that things are more expensive. No. Inflation means that the money supply has been increased and goods, services, product, materials, etc., is in shorter supply because there's more money. So it's not that things are more expensive, like gas and items from the supermarket. It's not that they're more expensive. It's that this is worth less. This lost value. Now, I'm going to show you a quick reference video to kind of emphasize what I'm talking about. This was produced by Zeitgeist. Good documentary. If you get a chance, look at it. The whole documentary on YouTube or some other outlets like Odyssey. But this breaks down money creation. And I want to play this for you. But before I do that, let me ask you to press the like button, subscribe to this channel if you have not done so already. And yeah, let's keep this going. And the way we keep it going is with your support. So please subscribe to the channel, click the like button. All right, let's watch this video.
Reserve produced a document entitled Modern Money Mechanics. This publication detailed the institutionalized practice of money creation as utilized by the Federal Reserve and the web of global commercial banks it supports. On the opening page, the document states its objective. The purpose of this booklet is to describe the basic process of money creation in a fractional reserve banking system. It then proceeds to describe this fractional reserve process through various banking terminology, a translation of which goes something like this. The United States government decides it needs some money, so it calls up the Federal Reserve and requests, say, $10 billion. The Fed replies saying, sure, we'll buy $10 billion in government bonds from you. So the government takes some pieces of paper, paints some official-looking designs on them, and calls them treasury bonds. Then it puts a value on these bonds to the sum of $10 billion and sends them over to the Fed. In turn, the people at the Fed draw up a bunch of impressive pieces of paper.
Wait a minute, let me do this here. We'll get this to work.
A number of years ago, the Central Bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve, produced a document entitled Modern Money Mechanics. This publication detailed the institutionalized practice of money creation as utilized by the Federal Reserve and the web of global commercial banks it supports. On the opening page, the document states its objective. The purpose of this booklet is to describe the basic process of money creation in a fractional...
I apologize. There's some technical issues I'm running into with this screen, and we're going to give it another shot because I want you to see this video. It's extremely important. All right. We're going to give this one more shot here. Share the screen this way. All right. Let's try this.
Then proceeds to describe this fractional reserve process. A number of years ago, the Central Bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve, produced a document entitled Modern Money Mechanics. This publication detailed the institutionalized practice of money creation as utilized by the Federal Reserve and the web of global commercial banks it supports. On the opening page, the document states its objective. The purpose of this booklet is to describe the basic process of money creation in a fractional reserve banking system. It then proceeds to describe this fractional reserve process through various banking terminology, a translation of which goes something like this. The United States government decides it needs some money, so it calls up the Federal Reserve and requests, say, $10 billion. The Fed replies saying, sure, we'll buy $10 billion in government bonds from you. So the government takes some pieces of paper, paints some official-looking designs on them, and calls them treasury bonds. Then it puts a value on these bonds to the sum of $10 billion and sends them over to the Fed. In turn, the people at the Fed draw up a bunch of impressive pieces of paper themselves, only this time calling them Federal Reserve notes, also designating a value of $10 billion to the Fed. The Fed then takes these notes and trades them for the bonds. Once this exchange is complete, the government then takes the $10 billion in Federal Reserve notes and deposits it into a bank account. And upon this deposit, the paper notes officially become legal tender money, adding $10 billion to the U.S. money supply. And there it is. $10 billion in new money has been created. Of course, this example is a generalization, for, in reality, this transaction would occur electronically, with no paper used at all. In fact, only 3% of the U.S. money supply exists in physical currency. The other 97% essentially exists in computers alone. Now, government bonds are, by design, instruments of debt. And when the Fed purchases these bonds, with money it essentially created out of thin air, the government is actually promising to pay back that money to the Fed. In other words, the money was created out of debt. This mind-numbing paradox of how money or value can be created out of debt or a liability will become more clear as we further this exercise. So, the exchange has been made and now $10 billion sits in a commercial bank account. Here's where it gets really interesting. For as based on the fractional reserve practice, that $10 billion deposit instantly becomes part of the bank's reserves, just as all deposits do. And regarding reserve requirements, as stated in modern money mechanics, a bank must maintain legally required reserves equal to a prescribed percentage of its deposits. It then quantifies this by stating, under current regulations, the reserve requirement against most transaction accounts is 10%. This means that with a $10 billion deposit, 10%, or $1 billion, is held as the required reserve, while the other $9 billion is considered an excessive reserve and can be used as the basis for new loans. Now, it is logical to assume that this $9 billion is literally coming out of the existing $10 billion deposit. However, this is actually not the case. What really happens is that the $9 billion is simply created out of thin air on top of the existing $10 billion deposit. This is how the money supply is expanded. As stated in modern money mechanics, of course they, the banks, do not really pay out loans from the money they receive as deposits. If they did this, no additional money would be created. What they do when they make loans is to accept promissory notes, loan contracts, in exchange for credits, money, to the borrower's transaction accounts. In other words, the $9 billion can be created out of nothing simply because there is a demand for such a loan and that there is a $10 billion deposit to satisfy the reserve requirements. Now, let's assume that somebody walks into this bank and borrows the newly available $9 billion. They will then most likely take that money and deposit it into their own bank account. The process then repeats, for that deposit becomes part of the bank's reserves. 10% is isolated, and in turn 90% of the $9 billion, or $8.1 billion, is now available as newly created money for more loans. And of course, that 8.1 can be loaned out and redeposited, additional 7.2 billion to 6.5 billion to 5.9 billion, etc. This deposit money creation loan cycle can technically go on to infinity. The average mathematical result is that about $90 billion can be created on top of the original 10 billion. In other words, for every deposit that ever occurs in the banking system, about 9 times that amount can be created out of thin air.
Money jitters? Ask the obliging Bank of America for a jar of soothing instant money, M-O-N-E-Y, in the form of a convenient personal loan.
So, now that we understand how money is created by this fractional reserve banking system, a logical yet elusive question might come to mind. What is actually giving this newly created money value? The answer? The money that already exists. The new money essentially steals value from the existing money supply. For the total pool of money is being increased irrespective to demand for goods and services. And as supply and demand finds equilibrium, prices rise, diminishing the purchasing power of each individual dollar. This is generally referred to as inflation, and inflation is essentially a hidden tax on the public.
What is the advice that you generally get? And that is inflate the currency. They don't say debase the currency. They don't say devalue the currency. They don't say cheat the people who are saved. They say lower the interest rates. The real deception is when we distort the value of money. When we create money out of thin air, we have no savings, and yet there's so-called capital. So my question boils down to this: how in the world can we expect to solve the problems of inflation, that is, the increase in the supply of money, with more inflation?
Of course, it can't. The fractional reserve system of monetary expansion is inherently inflationary. For the act of expanding the money supply, without there being a proportional expansion of goods and services in the economy, will always debase a currency. In fact, a quick glance at the historical values of the US dollar versus the money supply reflects this point definitively, for the inverse relationship is obvious. $1 in 1913 required $21.60 in 2007 to match value. That is a 96% devaluation since the Federal Reserve came into existence. Now, if this reality of inherent and perpetual inflation seems absurd and economically self-defeating, hold that thought, for absurdity is an understatement in regard to how our financial system really operates. For in our financial system, money is debt. And debt is money. Here is a chart of the U.S. money supply from 1950 to 2006. Here is a chart of the U.S. national debt for the same period. How interesting it is that the trends are virtually the same. For the more money there is, the more debt there is. The more debt there is, the more money there is. To put it a different way, every single dollar in your wallet is owed to somebody by somebody. For remember, the only way the money can come into existence is from loans. Therefore, if everyone in the country were able to pay off all debts, including the government, there would not be $1 in circulation. In fact, the last time in American history the national debt was completely paid off was in 1835, after President Andrew Jackson shut down the central bank that preceded the Federal Reserve. In fact, Jackson's entire political platform essentially revolved around his commitment to shut down the central bank, stating at one point, "The bold efforts the present bank has made to control the government are but premonitions of the fate that awaits the American people, should they be deluded into a perpetuation of this institution or the establishment of another like it." Unfortunately, his message was short-lived, and the international bankers succeeded to install another central bank in 1913, the Federal Reserve. And as long as this institution exists, perpetual debt is guaranteed. Now, so far we have discussed the reality that money is created out of debt, through loans. These loans are based on a bank's reserves, and reserves are derived from deposits. And through this fractional reserve system, any one deposit can create 9 times its original value, in turn debasing the existing money supply, raising prices in society. And since all this money is created out of debt and circulated randomly through commerce, people become detached from their original debt, and a disequilibrium exists, where people are forced to compete for labor in order to pull enough money out of the money supply to cover their costs of living. As dysfunctional and backwards as all of this might seem, there is still one thing we have omitted from this equation. And it is this element of the structure which reveals the truly fraudulent nature of the system itself: the application of interest. When the government borrows money from the Fed, or when a person borrows money from a bank, it almost always has to be paid back with accrued interest. In other words, almost every single dollar that exists must be eventually returned to a bank with interest paid as well. But if all money is borrowed from the central bank and is expanded by commercial banks through loans, only what would be referred to as the principal is being created in the money supply. So then, where is the money to cover all of the interest that is charged? Nowhere. It doesn't exist. The ramifications of this are staggering, for the amount of money owed back to the banks will always exceed the amount of money that is available in circulation. This is why inflation is a constant in the economy, for new money is always needed to help cover the perpetual deficit built into the system, caused by the need to pay the interest. What this also means is that mathematically, defaults and bankruptcy are literally built into the system, and there will always be poor pockets of society that get the short end of the stick. An analogy would be a game of musical chairs, for once the music stops, somebody is left out to dry. And that's the point. It invariably transfers true wealth from the individual to the banks. For if you are unable to pay for your mortgage, they will take your property. This is particularly enraging when you realize that not only is such a default inevitable due to the fractional reserve practice, but also because of the fact that the money that the bank loaned to you didn't even legally exist in the first place. In 1969, there was a Minnesota court case involving a man named Jerome Daly, who was challenging the foreclosure of his home by the bank which provided the loan to purchase it. His argument was that the mortgage contract required both parties, being he and the bank, each put up a legitimate form of property for the exchange. In legal language, this is called consideration. Mr. Daly explained that the money was, in fact, not the property of the bank, for it was created out of nothing as soon as the loan agreement was signed. Remember what modern money mechanics stated about loans? What they do when they make loans is to accept promissory notes in exchange for credits. Reserves are unchanged by the loan transactions, but deposit credits constitute new additions to the total deposits of the banking system. In other words, the money doesn't come out of their existing assets. The bank is simply inventing it, putting up nothing of its own, except for a theoretical liability on paper. As the court case progressed, the bank's president, Mr. Morgan, took the stand, and in the judge's personal memorandum, he recalled that the plaintiff, bank's president, admitted that, in combination with the Federal Reserve Bank, did create the money and credit upon its books by bookkeeping entry. The money and credit first came into existence when they created it. Mr. Morgan admitted that no United States law or statute existed which gave him the right to do this. A lawful consideration must exist and be tendered to support the note. The jury found that there was no lawful consideration, and I agree. He also poetically added, "Only God can create something of value out of nothing." And upon this revelation, The court rejected the bank's claim for foreclosure, and Daley kept his home. The implications of this court decision are immense. For every time you borrow money from a bank, whether it is a mortgage loan or a credit card charge, the money given to you is not only counterfeit, it is an illegitimate form of consideration, and hence voids the contract to repay, for the bank never had the money as property to begin with. Unfortunately, such legal realizations are suppressed and ignored, and the game of perpetual wealth transfer and perpetual debt continues.
All right, so that was again a great video produced by Zeitgeist. Man, I can't say enough about it. If you get an opportunity, this was from Zeitgeist 3 Addendum, Money Creation and the Fractional Reserve Banking. All right, so that's that video. You know, in addition to the documentation I'm showing you videos because I want to try to illustrate the point where it hits home, where you really understand what I'm talking about in terms of this fake money, this fiat currency that we all carry in our pocket, that is really based on a promise at this point. It's not based on anything of value like it used to be. Let me go back to the literal money that I have as an example tonight. So we talked about the silver certificate and how it no longer exists. And that the bearer of the certificate, which was money in 1935, had to receive, it had to be payable on demand in pure silver. That doesn't exist anymore. We talked about how this current bill, I think this is from 2003, regular dollar in circulation. It's just a note, no different than a car note, a house note, or a credit card bill. It's debt. This is value. Here's something really crazy I want to share with you. I thought about this as I was creating this video, but it's so relevant right now with this conversation. Yeah, let me pull this over here. All right. We'll do that. Okay. Pull this back up. All right, so this next document that I'm going to show you has everything to do with the money I just showed you. All right, let me share my screen. There we go, screen 2. All right, so on this screen you can see, well, let me go here. There we go. This is the silver certificate that I just showed you. And the current price of this particular bill listed here is, what is that? $5,000. It's an F series bill. And no different than the bill I just showed you. I think this one has, yeah, it says a super rare, I guess some type of stripe, yeah, on the back in the center. But nevertheless, this particular bill is worth money. Even though it's not in circulation, because it's an old bill and because it actually represented value at the time, it still maintains its value. It's actually going up in value, you know, which is not something we can say about our money right now. That's for sure. Our money is not going up in value. All right. Let me show you another document here. That's that. Get out of there. Get out of there. Yeah. All right. So this is a dime that I'm going to show you. They say, Mike, you showing me all this money. What's the point? I'm showing you this money because I want you to see what real money looks like. This is a Roosevelt dime from 1964. Pick it up. Yeah. See it a lot more clear here. 1964. This dime is silver. It is pure silver. It is not the nickel and, you know, aluminum, alloy, or whatever stuff they use now for our coins. This is a literal silver dime. It's not very big, but it's 100% silver. Look at that. Look at the edge here. If you compare that to other coins, you can see the difference. See, this is another coin. See the copper? See? And then it's like a plate. This is a commemorative coin, 100, 200-year coin, but still it's not silver. This is silver. So, big difference. Now, when I go over here to this screen, I'm going to show you why I brought this dime up. Why I dropped dime on you. All right, if you look at the screen, you'll see that that same 1964 Roosevelt dime, depending on the condition, if it has any flaw, somebody's selling it here for $465. It's silver. It's pure silver. Okay. That's the difference between what we call money now and what was money before. And that's the reason why we have inflation. Now, the video broke down inflation and explained it. This graph goes one step further. This shows the value of money really for the last 100 years. So if you look at what a dollar is in 2020, you can buy a cup of coffee from McDonald's. All right. And in 1913, a dollar had the same buying power as $26 in 2020. There's a lot of things that took place to cause us to be in the current predicament that we're in. Let me zoom in here a little more. And you can kind of see what took place. So we had the Federal Reserve Act, which took place in 1913. And you can see here, a central bank was created to manage the country's money supply. Immediately, the value dropped. So that dollar that was worth $26.14 immediately dropped to being worth $15.14. Then it went back up, and then down again, and then up, and then down again. Right? All of these, and this graph I actually have a better one. But all of these represent what happened to money, why money is in the condition it's in. So the Federal Reserve, you can see the money, you can see the value drops. Then President Roosevelt criminalizes the possession of gold. So there was a time in the 1930s when all of the gold was confiscated, and this was after the stock market crash of 1929. And he pulled off gold, took it from every American. And if you had it, you could be basically locked in prison. Maybe not locked in prison, probably charged with a heavy fine and, you know, yeah, not locked in prison. That was a little too extreme. But the point is, it was illegal to own gold. So the government confiscated all the gold, and there was a Bretton Woods agreement that took place in the 1940s, 1945, after World War II. It basically pegged all the money to the gold standard, and it made the dollar the standard currency of the world's reserve currency. Well, in 1971, we had what was referred to as the Nixon shock. And all of the policies that dealt with money being backed by gold were eliminated. And the United States was taken off the gold standard. So now the money became the petrodollar. Now that's a whole other conversation. But you can see how the steady decline of the dollar has happened throughout the last 100 years. So back to the original point. Your dollar in 1913, right at the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank, was worth $26. Here we go, 1913. Now, your dollar, and you could buy, they use here an example. You had $26.14 of buying power. You could buy 30 Hershey chocolates bars in 1930. I don't know why they use that example, but they did. Okay. And then you can see it going down, 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 down. So the current reality that your dollar is worth only enough to buy a cup of coffee. The money supply keeps growing, which reduces all of the money that we currently have in our possession. That's how this works. Every time they print more money, the money in your pocket is worth less. And this is why it's called a Federal Reserve note, because it's no different than a car note and a house note. It's not backed by anything. It's not worth anything other than the promise that your money will be worth something. That's it. Has no intrinsic value, no value backed by any sound, precious metal or anything like that. And now that this is happening, this is referred to as the BRICS Bank, the New Development Bank. And BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. They've all come together to form a counter currency to the US dollar. They're doing this because they don't want the dollar to be the dominant currency anymore. Well, what we fail to realize in this country is that we only benefit from the dollar because everybody accepts the dollar around the world as the world reserve currency. If that ends, and it's kind of ending now, we're in for a world of trouble. Because for the last 100 years, we shipped our dollars overseas and they sent us back their natural resources. That's how it works. And countries that we keep sanctioning with these wars and conflicts, they're getting tired of it. Especially countries like China, which has the biggest economy in the world now. Russia. These countries have been, you could almost say, abused by the United States and its authority and its currency. And now they're sick of it. And they're sick of the sanctions, and they've decided we can have our own currency and we can back it by something worth something like gold, something like silver, the way we used to. I'm going to share my screen one more time and show you some currency from another country. All right, so we went over the silver certificate, compared it to the dollar. Get that out the way. Now, excuse me. This is Bolivarian currency from Venezuela. Look at that. $2,000 bill, $1,000 bill. Look at this currency here. This currency is worth nothing right now. $2,000 bill, $5,000 bill, $1,000 bill, $500 bill. I'm showing you this because of the sanctions that the United States has put on Brazil. Why I keep saying Brazil? Venezuela. Their currency and the value of their money is literally worthless. Absolutely worthless. It's beautiful artwork, and it should be worth something. And the reason why I bring this up is because everybody's dealing with oil, gas prices, and trying to understand how this whole thing works. What if I told you, and you can look this up? In fact, I may look it up for you. Venezuela is one of the most it is the richest country when it comes to oil resources on the planet. That's right, Venezuela. And their money is worth absolutely nothing. The reason it's worth nothing is because of sanctions put on Venezuela by the United States and the United Nations for not playing ball, not going along with the program. And in America, just like we saw earlier with the video of Gaddafi, if you challenge America's supremacy, if you challenge America's domination of the world, like Gaddafi tried to do with, setting up the gold dinar, this is considered a threat to the United States of America. And they will open up a can of democracy on your ass. Pardon the bad language, but that's just a fact. That's what they do. They did it to Saddam Hussein when he decided he wanted to sell his oil for euros. What did they do? They invaded his country shortly after that, right? Forget all the headlines and, he was responsible for 9/11. That was all BS. This man decided to challenge the dollar, and that will get you assassinated and killed, and your country would be overthrown if you decide to do that. That's how it was. Things are changing with everything with this Russia-Ukrainian war that's happening. The dollar is at risk. It's at risk because these other countries that I mentioned, Brazil, Brazil, India, Russia, China, they have decided they are willing to set up their own system and challenge the U.S. directly and economically. All right, get off that there and share this next one with you. So Venezuela, let me see. The proven oil reserves of Venezuela are recognized as the largest in the world. You see that? Totaling 300 billion barrels. So why is the largest and the richest oil reserve country on the planet? Why do they have a currency that has been devalued? If you get your oil from Saudi Arabia, their money is worth something, right? All these other countries, it's because of the policies of the United States. This money is worthless, yet they're the most oil-rich country in the world. People are literally starving in the streets. But now that Russia is the enemy of the United States, the Biden administration sent a delegation down to Venezuela to kind of make nice, right? They want that oil now. So they're willing to overlook all of the stuff that they said was a problem, the reason they had the sanctions. They're willing to overlook all of that because they want the oil, okay? That's how the system works. And it's a shame. All right, I'm going to share my screen again. We talked about J.P. Morgan and what he said regarding money. He said gold is money, everything else is credit. So we dealt with that. Let me see here. We talked about inflation. The fact that, the current rate is 7.5%, and it's expected to be even higher, and it is now the highest since 1992. Here's what I wanted to cover. So, since the pandemic and everything that has happened over the last 2 years, the United States has just been printing money like crazy, or should I say, the Federal Reserve Bank and the Treasury Department has been printing money like crazy. Because of this massive money printing that they've been doing, the money in circulation right now, as of January 2020, is $20.354 trillion. Okay. The United States has printed nearly 80% of all the US dollars in existence since January of 2020. That's why gas is expensive. That's why bread is expensive. That's why, things cost more. It's not because things cost more, it's because your money is worth less. And this is the game, a giant Ponzi scheme, if you will. But look at this. US billionaires got 62% richer during this pandemic. They're now up to $1.8 trillion. So what we have witnessed with the pandemic was a massive transfer of wealth from the working class and the poor to the rich. That's what we've experienced. And it's not even any denying it. I want to show you another video from Jim Cramer. Now,
Amazon, people are out.
Jim Cramer is a financial analyst on MSNBC, and he deals with a lot of topics related to investing, giving stock advice. But during the pandemic, he said something, and I don't know if you would call this a Freudian slip or what, but he basically said that at this rate, with all the mom and pop businesses closing down, that we'll have a situation where there's only 3 or 4 major corporations selling the stuff: Amazon, Walmart, and I think he said Costco. But I'll let you hear the video. It's about a minute and a half.
Amazon, people are out of their bunkers. The analysts have been waiting, I think, for a one-up day to be able to say some good things. And what's remarkable is there's just a chorus of people saying you got to buy Amazon, that the world has changed forever, that people realize that they can buy many more things on Amazon than they thought. I mean, I got home last night. There were 4 packages from Amazon that my wife ordered. I mean, all sorts of things that we would just normally have just gone down the street to a Rite Aid or Walgreens. And why? Because we don't want to be where there's crowds. And so Amazon is the anti-crowd retailer. By the way, Amazon and Walmart both announced hiring. Walmart announced a spectacular bonus plan. You know what I think these have to do, David? We come out of this sooner than other small businesses can open. If we come out of this later, David, there's going to be 3 retailers in this country. There's going to be Amazon, there's going to be Walmart, and there's going to be Costco. And that is something that the government cannot afford to have happen. If it comes out that those are the 3, can you imagine, David, what it means for this country to just have 3 retailers?
No, it would not be a good thing in so many different ways, Jim. And you're right. They are dominant already, and certainly cementing that dominance conceivably given these highly unusual conditions in which we find ourselves.
So during the pandemic, all of the mom and pop small businesses had to close because the disease only affected you if you were in a small business. But if you were in a big business, like a super Walmart, you didn't catch the disease. It was immune. You were immune and you were safe. Basically, this was a money grab. This exactly is what I showed you in the article. All the big companies, the businesses, the bigger businesses, they got wealthier during the pandemic because the mom and pop businesses were closed down. And what happens when these businesses close down? Well, you might say, hey, they got a loan. They was able to sustain them, not for 2 years. 2 years of opening and closing and shutting down. What happened was a giant fire sale. What do I mean? These businesses financially took a hit so bad that market share was snatched up by the bigger companies, the Amazons, the Costcos, the Walmarts. Because if I can maintain a business online and you got to close Main Street, I have an unfair advantage. And that's exactly what happened. That's why Amazon is taking over the world, or taking over the economic world, so to speak, in the economy in the United States in terms of being the biggest retailer. I mean, this is horrible. And the end result is monopoly. Because once everybody else is out of business, and there's only Amazon, Walmart, and Costco, they can raise their prices and you have no other place to go to get the products and goods you want. That's the game. So today the price is cheap, but in 3 or 4 years, when they're the only person selling it, the price will be more expensive. And they will be able to charge you more money and get it because you'll have no place to go. This is the reality. This is what's happening to our dollar system. Is there a solution? Yes. In my opinion, if you have money, your assets consist of real estate and precious metals. That's where it's at, because the stock market is based on emotion, all emotion. And 401ks and all these retirement programs, listen, if you have $1 million in the bank and all of a sudden you wake up tomorrow and this is worth half, $100 is worth $50, or $1 is worth 50 cents. Where's the value in that? So your money, if it's tied up in cash and investments, where's the value in that? Now you might say, hey, Mike, I'll just invest in Amazon, or I'll just invest in Costco. Well, fine. Yeah, you could do that. The crazy part about the stock market, in my opinion, is that it can all change based on somebody's emotion. So if Warren Buffett or somebody decides they don't like, Amazon stock, the stock goes down, that affects your portfolio. But here's where you're not affected. If you own real estate and you're collecting rent, for example, and that becomes your retirement money, if prices go up, meaning the price for college education, the price for groceries, the price for gas, the price for rent, your income goes up and it keeps pace with inflation because you have rental income and you have a tangible asset. The same thing with gold and silver. I showed you how much this silver dime is worth from 1964. It's going up in value. It's a precious metal. We got to start getting smarter because the game is about to change rapidly. China, Russia, Brazil, India, the BRICS bank that I showed you earlier, they're going to challenge the dollar because of bad policies. These countries will abandon the dollar eventually. And we in America will wake up to a world that we don't recognize. We'll literally wake up to a world that we don't recognize. Because they will not be shipping us their cheap goods anymore, their cheap oil, their cheap clothing. And when I say cheap, I mean inexpensive, because they won't need the dollar. That is the reality that we're facing. And we got to smarten up. This is an economic chart, and it just shows, let me see. Yeah, this is the money supply, right? Look how much it went up during the pandemic. Okay. Look at that. The amount of money in circulation affects the money in your pocket, just like the illustration in the video showed. I didn't get a chance to show this slide, but you can thank this guy, President Nixon. He's not just a crook who had to resign in disgrace, but he took the United States off the gold standard. He canceled that. This is when money started to lose its value in the 70s. And then you have the Gold Reserve Act, where Roosevelt basically confiscated all the gold and gold certificates and made it against the law to have physical gold. And this also affected the money supply. So back to back to back, over the last 100 years, we've had a lot of volatility. And the only thing that has grown or has consistently increased the value over the last 100 years are those three things I mentioned. I mean, you can tie in artwork and things like that, but gold, silver, and real estate, land, they increase in value no matter what's going on in the economy. You could literally have $1 million in your house in cash or in the bank, and in 10 years, the buying power could lose 10, 15, 20%. But if you have real estate or precious metals, it will go up in value. That's how this thing works. Listen, I hope you enjoyed the show tonight. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Press the like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. And we'll be back with another show soon. Thank you again. Have a good night.